The spy now turns to the analysis of Fuller and Fromm, former Reagan and Bush White House aide Craig Fuller and former Clinton advisor Al Fromm. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Craig, let's start with you and your experience working in the White House. Yesterday, President Trump and Vice President Pence told reporters that the administration's coronavirus task force was winding down. Today, about 3 hours ago, the president tweeted that he expects the White House task force to continue indefinitely. What's your take on this?
I suppose that this is another example of the lack of consistency from one day to the next by this White House. I really think they probably want it both ways. They want to get the emphasis off of these daily news conferences, whatever they are, on the coronavirus and what the task force is doing, and on to economic growth. On the other hand, they want to drive everything out of the White House. And you really can't have it both ways. The fact of the matter is, even if the formality of a task force were to go away, this White House, indeed probably most White House administrations, would coordinate and run the response to this pandemic out of the White House, working closely, obviously, with the agencies that are involved. So whether they call it a task force, whether they call it back to routine operations, although nothing's routine anymore, I think you're going to see this activity pretty much run out of the White House. And probably that's what Trump realized he wanted when he reversed course for today. We'll see what happens tomorrow.
Al, what is the significance politically on this subject? Is there a price to pay when you switch gears?
Well, I think if there's a price to pay, it's probably already been paid. I don't think there's very much political significance in this particular decision. I think the president's political future is really dependent on his performance. Incumbents who try to get reelected are judged on their performance, and I think the judgment, by and large, on the way he's handled this crisis, barring a miracle, is already in. To me, he probably wasn't very much engaged in the task force anyway, but it was a good excuse to have his variety show on television every night. And when he found out, even though his ratings were high, people didn't like the character, he wanted to pull back. I think what made him do this, what he said yesterday, was he doesn't like to be compared to Dr. Fauci. And he didn't want to be on television with Fauci every day. So since it was just a television show to him, he thought he'd cancel the show. But now, today, I think the reality may have set in, and somebody said, you got to keep this going.
Al, let's stick with you. The other thing that came up over the last couple of days is Joe Biden and the fact that he's had to defend himself for several days against charges that he had sexually assaulted a former congressional aide 27 years ago. Do you think the former vice president is handling this well?
I guess I don't think there's going to be a lot of political fallout, because in the end, nothing Biden could do on that front would ever compare to what President Trump has been accused of, and much of which he's even bragged about. But if he handled it well, there's the old story about Lyndon Johnson telling a political aide to accuse a rival of doing it with sheep, and the guy said, but he doesn't do it with sheep, and Johnson said, make him deny it. It's never good to have to deny something, but on the other hand, Biden was categorical, and as long as nothing comes out in the next 6 months to disprove what he said, I think Biden actually is probably more credible than his accuser in this case.
Washington. I think that Vice President Biden, first of all, is not somebody who has any pattern of misbehavior that's can be identified, other than this sort of touching phenomenon that he likes to slap people on the back and put his arm around them. But that's hardly a crime, and he seems to be refraining from that. I think the most important thing is that he have one answer, that he sticks to that answer, and that we don't have some repetition or series of individuals coming forward, which seems unlikely at this point. And I completely agree with Al that in this case, he has an opponent who's going to be hard put to make a whole lot out of this. I would also add that coming at this point in a campaign is kind of a gift. Having this problem in October is a much bigger problem. Getting it through this now is probably helpful in a number of ways.
You know, this morning, the SPY released the results of a reader poll, which asked them to score how major actors, including local and federal government and the mainstream media, were handling the crisis. The person with the strongest positive score was Republican Governor Larry Hogan. And in the last place was Republican Donald Trump. Craig, you've looked at the results. What are your thoughts on this kind of differential?
I thought the results were fascinating. First of all, you rarely see such a wide range. I know the way the survey worked, there were tiers, but the top tier, as you accurately point out, contains Governor Larry Hogan, who actually we know scored highest in the surveys. And in the bottom tier are two other political officials, as you point out, President Trump and also Congressman Andy Harris. But the range was quite remarkable. And I think that speaks volumes, really, that people have a very high regard for an individual like Governor Hogan, who deals with facts, deals with science, seems prudent and cautious, is in command of the facts when he's in front of an audience. I think also good news and impressive for Governor Hogan is that just behind him was Dr. Fauci, somebody who America has seen seems to trust enormously with this. Might also add, by the way, Dave, congratulations, because the SPY was in that top tier as the most trusted media organization, and several were actually surveyed. I do think that the survey was surprisingly negative on President Trump, given the fact that it was Eastern Shore based for the Talbot SPY and the Chestertown SPY, and there's a number of quite a few Trump supporters in the area, but they seem to be concerned by the way he has conducted himself on this issue. And I think for Andy Harris, there's a message here. Don't tie yourself so closely to somebody who's sitting at the very bottom of a favorable, unfavorable survey.
Al, what's your take?
My take is that Larry Hogan's done a good job, and people recognize it. He's my neighbor. I'm sitting here about 2 blocks from the Capitol and the governor's mansion. You know, people reward good leadership, and across the country, they think governors are highly rated for their response to the COVID-19 crisis. Trump isn't, because, as Craig said earlier, he's all over the map. He gives crazy information. I mean, I've been trying to figure out what dose to take my disinfectant in. And so people are smart, and they understand what good leadership is. And it's a matter, you know, this really goes to a bottom line of what the election is going to be about in the fall, and it's going to be about Trump's performance. So if in an area like the Eastern Shore, his ratings are in the toilet, he's got a lot of work to do. And the great irony is you can't do it in any other way but by actually winding up providing the kind of leadership that helps us out of this crisis, which from all I can see has the potential for getting worse rather than better over the next few months.
Finally, one big challenge for the presumptive Democratic nominee will be choosing a running mate. And Joe Biden has already started that process by saying that his selection will be a woman. And as you both look at that field in this category, who interests you as the most viable candidates for him to consider. Al, let's start with you.
Well, first of all, the most important thing in picking a vice president is you have to pick somebody who has the ability to take over at a moment's notice to be president. I mean, it's a reality that Joe Biden's going to be, if he's elected, it's going to be the oldest president ever elected. So you need to have somebody who can do the job. From a political perspective, the key constituency going to be suburban white women. People who normally vote Republican would vote for Craig Fuller's candidates, but they hate Trump. And so what you need is somebody who will not discourage them from voting Democratic. So I have two candidates who I think are fit that bill the best. One is Senator Amy Klobuchar, who is a presidential candidate in her own right. And the second is Governor Whitmer of Michigan, who I think has looked very good in handling the crisis in her state. And I think either one of them could be a very good complement to hopefully President Biden.
Well, I think that Al is on track. Although I'm going to get to a slightly different place. I will say this though, that the process of selecting a vice president for a presidential candidate is one of the most important things that they go through during the course of a campaign. There aren't too many command decisions you make as a candidate for president that are as visible. So the way in which he makes a decision, the way, the nature of the deliberation is all very important. John McCain, as we know, had a kind of a haphazard approach to, his aides told him he couldn't pick the person he wanted, so he picked Sarah Palin, which was kind of astounded even Republicans. So this process is important to watch, and it's really one of the few things that's kind of going on in a presidential election where we really know who both nominees are most likely to be. Having said that, I agree with Al about needing to win over moderates, but I think equally as important is the need to really motivate the base and turn out the vote. Trump has the ability to turn out loyal supporters, and Joe Biden and his vice presidential nominee are really going to have to excite and motivate the base. And for that reason, I don't think the state matters as much. The analysis that sometimes says we'll pick somebody who can carry their state is proven not to be all that significant over in past years. I don't think it's that significant this year. So I actually favor Kamala Harris. I think Kamala Harris comes from California, a large state. She's won statewide election as Attorney General, as Senator. She has a law enforcement background, which will appeal to many in the undecided, if not moderate Republican group. But most of all, I think a woman of color from the West is going to turn out a lot of voters, and that's something that Biden is really going to need, I think, in these states. He also, I think, as Al's candidates did, meets another important test, in that you have to be at this stage. He really needs somebody who's been vetted. You can't pick somebody who's not gone through the examination that a presidential candidate has gone through or a governor has gone through. You can't make a mistake. You need to make certain that when you go out there, you have somebody that is going to be unquestionably ready to go from the start. And I also quite agree. You have to have somebody who people look at and say, yes, if something happened, this person could be president.
Thank you, gentlemen. See you next time.